I got mad when my boyfriend overheard me talking with friends before our wedding. He broke up with me for cheating, but I say it is his fault for not respecting my privacy. 2 weeks were left until my wedding with Alex. 2 weeks until the culmination of what I considered an almost perfect 6-year relationship. Alex is an engineer, a brilliant, detail-oriented man with a heart of gold. He is the type of person who prepares your favorite dish after a terrible day and who patiently listens to your work dramas without flinching. Together we had built a life that was the envy of everyone. A beautiful apartment, exotic trips, and a future that seemed as bright as it was well planned. He trusted me blindly. That trust was the foundation of everything, and I valued it in my own way. For me, trust meant having the freedom to be myself, to have my own spaces, my own secrets.
Not malicious secrets, of course, but that small private garden that every person needs to breathe. Alex, in his wonderful simplicity, never questioned that garden. He never asked me for the keys. If there was a crack in our relationship, it was precisely that, his lack of curiosity. His trust sometimes bordered on naivety. He was so good, so pure, that sometimes I felt as if I were guarding a fragile treasure. I am more complex. My life before him was hectic. I have a past, stories that I do not need to share because they are irrelevant to our present. The crisis, the incident that now threatens to destroy everything, originated at my bachelorette party 2 months ago. My friends, led by my maid of honor, Laura, organized a trip to Ibiza for me. It was a weekend of madness, of sun, of music, of cocktails, a final hurrah to my single life. And in the midst of that atmosphere of euphoria and disinhibition, I made a mistake. It happened on the last night. I met a guy in a club, a French photographer named Jean-Pierre. The connection was purely superficial, a spark of adrenaline. We drank, we danced, and we ended up taking a walk on the beach. At dawn, what was bound to happen, happened. It was a miscalculation, a slip driven by alcohol and nostalgia for a freedom that I was about to give up forever. I did not feel guilty. I felt human. It was a meaningless act, a final point to a chapter of my life. It had nothing to do with my love for Alex. They were two separate compartments. Upon returning home, I stored the memory of that night in my private garden. I locked the door and threw away the key. The incident was contained. It was irrelevant. It did not affect my commitment to Alex or our future in any way. Telling him would have been an act of selfish cruelty.
Why hurt him with a truth that had no practical use? My silence was an act of protection. It was, in my opinion, proof of my love for him. After the trip to Ibiza, I immersed myself completely in the wedding preparations, using the avalanche of tasks as a way to reinforce the walls of my private garden. Every time I chose a centerpiece or tried a canopy, I reaffirmed my commitment to the life I was building with Alex. The secret of Jean-Pierre was not a burden, it was a reminder of the life I was leaving behind, which made the future with Alex seem even more valuable and definitive. My relationship with my friends Laura and Carla has always been my safe space. They are the only people who have a copy of the key to my secret garden. With them, I can be completely myself without filters. We talk about everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And of course, we talk about Ibiza. The bad decision, if you can call it that, was my complacency, my belief that my private world was impenetrable. Last Saturday, just 2 weeks before the wedding, I organized a bridal crisis afternoon at home. Laura and Carla came to help me with the final details, the seating arrangements, the vows, the song list. Alex was home, but he had locked himself in his study to get some work done. He told us not to bother him unless the house was on fire. We were in the living room with glasses of wine, surrounded by ribbons, cards, and the general chaos of an impending wedding. The conversation, as always, started to wander. Somehow we went from discussing whether Perfect by Ed Sheeran was too cliché for the first dance to reminiscing about the bachelorette party. God, I still cannot believe the Ibiza thing, Carla said, laughing and lowering her voice in a conspiratorial whisper. What did you call the French photographer? Jean-Luc, Jean-Pierre, I corrected her, smiling at the memory. And he was more of a walking cliché than a real photographer. A cliché you ended up watching the sunrise with, Laura added with a wink. You have to admit it was an epic way to say goodbye to single life, moo. The justification that formed in my mind at that moment was instant and protective. We are in my house, in my living room. Alex is in his study with his headphones on, working. This is my safe space. This conversation is private. It is no different from writing in a diary. They are just words, an echo of a past and unimportant event. The conversation continued along that path. We laughed, we shared details, we analyzed the situation. Do you think Alex would notice if you ever ran into him? Carla asked. Of course not, I replied. Alex lives in his own world of codes and algorithms. Besides, I will never see that man again. He was a ghost. An anecdote. He does not exist in my real life. Telling Alex about it would be like telling him about a dream I had. It makes no sense. It would only cause unnecessary pain. At that moment, we felt invincible, protected by the walls of my house and the wine. We had no idea that the walls had ears. We had no idea that Alex, having finished earlier than expected, had decided to go down to the kitchen for a glass of water and, instead of interrupting our girls' afternoon, had stood silently in the hallway, listening as the key to my private garden turned in the lock. The conversation about Ibiza lasted perhaps 10 minutes, a small frivolous interlude in an afternoon dedicated to wedding logistics. When we went back to talking about the table arrangements, the energy changed. We had shared our secret, we had laughed, and now we were back to the task at hand. We had closed the door to the private garden and returned to the real world. It was then that the study door opened. Alex appeared in the doorway. He did not look angry. He did not look sad. He had an expression of absolute calm, a stillness that was much more terrifying than any scream. His eyes, however, were not calm. They were fixed on me with an intensity one had never seen in him. It was as if he were seeing me for the first time. Laura and Carla fell silent at once. The atmosphere in the room went from cheerful and conspiratorial to so tense you could cut it with a knife. Hello, Alex said. His voice was a strangely flat murmur. Am I interrupting anything important? No, darling, not at all, I said, forcing a smile, my heart starting to pound against my ribs. Are you done with work already? Yes, he replied without looking away from me. I finished a while ago. I went to the kitchen for water. He paused for an eternity. The wooden floor in the hallway creaks a lot, you know? I have always thought we should fix it. Panic flooded me. A cold, paralyzing panic. He knew. He had heard everything. Laura and Carla looked at each other, terrified. They began to gather their things in a hurry, muttering excuses about having to leave. We are leaving now. We will call you tomorrow, Claudia. They got out of there as if the apartment were on fire, leaving me alone with him. Once the front door closed, Alex fully entered the living room. He stood in the middle of the chaos of our wedding invitations and future plans. And this is where, in my mind, the real act of betrayal occurred, not my slip-up in Ibiza, but his decision to violate my privacy. My brain, in an act of instant self-defense, did not focus on my confession, but on his method of discovery. The justification was immediate and furious. He has been eavesdropping. He has violated a private space. A conversation between friends is sacred. It is like reading my diary. What he has done is a fundamental betrayal of trust. How dare he spy in his own house? Regardless of what he heard, the way he obtained the information is the real crime here. Have you been listening behind the door? I asked him. My voice trembled, not with fear, but with a growing indignation. He nodded slowly, his face still a mask of calm. It was not my intention, but once I started hearing, I could not stop. You had no right. I snapped, getting defensive. It was a private conversation between girls. You are invading my privacy. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a glimpse of the wound beneath his calm. Your privacy, he repeated as if the word tasted like ash. Your privacy to talk about how you slept with another man behind my back? That privacy is not the point, I insisted, my manipulator's logic working at full speed to redefine the battlefield. The point is that you have broken the most basic trust. You spied. How can I ever trust you again knowing that you are listening to my conversations? This changes everything. I was trying to turn the situation around, to make him the accused. It was a desperate maneuver, an attempt to make his betrayal, eavesdropping, seem more serious than mine infidelity. For a moment, I saw the confusion on his face. My tactic almost worked, but only for a moment. My accusation, my attempt to turn him into the villain for violating my privacy, hung in the air. For an instant, it seemed to destabilize him, but the wound I had inflicted on him was too deep to be overshadowed by my counterattack. "You are right," Alex said, and his momentary agreement gave me a false surge of hope. I should not have listened. It was disrespectful. He paused, and then his voice became as sharp as ice. "But I am glad I did, because it seems it is the only way to know the truth in this house." The hope vanished. My maneuver had failed. "Alex, please, you have to understand the context," I pleaded, changing tactics. "It was at my bachelorette party. I drank too much. It was a stupid, meaningless mistake that meant absolutely nothing. It was a ghost, an anecdote, as you heard me say." "I have heard many things, Claudia," he said, and began to walk around the room, picking up one of the menu cards we had been designing. He looked at it as if it were an artifact from a lost civilization. "I have heard you call it a miscalculation. I have heard that you felt human. I have heard that your silence was an act of protection towards me and, above all, I have heard that you felt no guilt. Is that not true?" Of course I felt guilty, I lied, desperate. "No," he said, looking me straight in the eyes, and his certainty was terrifying. "You did not feel guilty for what you did. You felt guilty for the risk of me finding out. There is a huge difference." The conversation I just heard was not that of a repentant woman, it was that of a woman bragging about her secret with her friends, laughing at how naive I am. "I was not laughing at you," I shouted, feeling like I was losing control. "We were processing. It is what friends do." "Processing?" he laughed. A dry, pained laugh. It seemed more like a celebration. He left the card on the table. "For 6 years I have lived believing we had something based on honesty. I have trusted you absolutely, and all this time you have been living with a completely different definition of trust. For you, trust is simply my permission for you to keep your secrets." His analysis was so precise it left me breathless. He had stripped me of all my justifications and exposed the core of my philosophy. "You cannot reduce it all to that," I whispered, feeling cornered. "Oh no," he replied. "Well, let me reduce it to something even simpler. You slept with another man. You were planning to marry me without telling me. And the only reason we are having this conversation is because I did not put on my headphones and I had the misfortune of walking down the hallway at the wrong moment." He stopped in front of me. "The real question, Claudia, is not why I eavesdropped, it is how many other ghosts and anecdotes are in your private garden that I do not know about." "There is nothing else," I swore. Although the truth was that there were other stories, other minor secrets from my past that I had never told him. He smiled. A sad, final smile. "The problem is that I do not believe you anymore. And a marriage without trust is not a marriage, it is just a contract, and I am not going to sign." He turned and headed for the bedroom door. "What are you doing?" I asked with a broken voice. "I am going to pack my bag," he said without looking back. "I guess we have a lot of calls to make to cancel a wedding. And you have 2 weeks to find another place to keep your secrets." Alex's words, "find another place to keep your secrets," echoed in the apartment as he packed his bag. They were not the words of a heartbroken man. They were those of a judge delivering a sentence, a disproportionate, cruel, and above all, hypocritical sentence. While he methodically packed his things into a suitcase, I attempted one last assault. Not with pleas, with logic. My logic. "So this is it," I said, standing in the doorway. "You are throwing away 6 years of love, a whole wedding, our future. All for a meaningless mistake you would not even have known about if you had not been spying." He stopped and looked at me. "I am throwing it all away because I just discovered that the foundation on which we built these 6 years was a lie. The wedding, the future, all of that was fake because it was based on a version of you that does not exist." "Of course it exists," I insisted, my voice rising. "The woman who loves you exists. The one who has planned this wedding with you exists. What happened in Ibiza was an anomaly, a system error. You cannot erase the entire hard drive for one corrupt file. The problem is that the file was not corrupt, Claudia," he said, zipping up his suitcase. The operating system works exactly as you designed it, with secret compartments and firewalls to keep the truth out. And I cannot live inside that system. And with that, he left the room and, shortly after, my life. The cancellation of the wedding was a logistical nightmare and a public humiliation. Every call to a vendor, every conversation with a guest, was torture. But in the midst of that chaos, my narrative was forged, solid as a diamond. No, I was not the villain, I was the victim. A victim of a privacy violation so fundamental that it had destabilized an otherwise perfect relationship. My mistake in Ibiza, while technically incorrect, was emotionally irrelevant. It was contained, managed. It had no power over anyone. The real damage, the real betrayal, was Alex's act of eavesdropping. He chose to open Pandora's box. He chose to unleash this chaos. To my parents, to my friends, to anyone who would listen, I told my version. Alex and I had trust issues, I would say with my eyes full of conveniently summoned tears. He discovered a private conversation between my friends and me, took everything out of context, and instead of talking about it, of trusting me, he decided to implode our lives. His inability to respect my boundaries and my privacy is what really destroyed us. In this story, I am the defender of personal autonomy, and he is the insecure spy. My infidelity becomes a simple misunderstanding or a conversation taken out of context, while his act of listening is elevated to the level of a crime against trust. It is a much cleaner narrative, one in which I can hold my head high. Alex has proven to be who I always suspected he might be under his perfect man facade, someone controlling, unable to handle the complexities of a real woman. My private garden was not a threat to him, it was a threat to his need for total control. And for protecting that garden, I have lost my wedding and my fiancé. But what is a marriage without privacy? A prison. In a way, he has not left me, he has freed me. And he is the one who will have to live with the knowledge that he destroyed our future. All for not knowing how to respect a closed door. Reddit comments. Anonymous user 1 says, "The audacity of this post is impressive. Let's get this straight. Your boyfriend did not leave you for not respecting your privacy. He left you because he found out you are a cheater who lies and also laughs about his trust with her friends. The privacy you claim was not to protect your soul, it was to protect your lies. You have built a house of cards of justifications to avoid the plain and simple truth. You got caught." OP's reply, "Getting caught is the language of a parent discovering a child stealing cookies. We were a couple of adults. Adults are supposed to give each other the benefit of the doubt and private spaces. He chose to act like a detective in his own home. His lack of trust was the first and deepest betrayal. What happened after was just the consequence." Anonymous user 2 says, "The operating system works exactly as you designed it, with secret compartments and firewalls to keep the truth out." Your ex summed up your entire personality in one sentence. You are not angry because he left you. You are furious because he cracked your code. OP's reply, "My code. How dramatic. It is called having an inner life. All people have one. The difference is that mine was invaded. If he had respected my privacy, we would be happily married right now. He chose this path, did he not? Not me. It is that simple." Anonymous user 3 says, "What I find craziest is the phrase, 'My silence was an act of protection.' No, your silence was an act of selfishness. You were robbing him of his ability to make an informed decision about who he was going to spend the rest of his life with. You wanted to marry him under false pretenses. That is not protection, it is the most intimate fraud that exists." Anonymous user 4 says, "Friend, you have tried so hard to flip the script that you have ended up making scrambled eggs, and now you are mad at everyone because the kitchen is a mess." Update 1 month later. It has been a month since Alex detonated our lives because of his inability to handle a half-truth he should never have known. I thank all the analysts in the comments. Your lack of nuance is predictable. You are still stuck on what I did without understanding the why he did it, which is the root of everything. His violation of my privacy was the spark. The end. My life has become a public relations campaign. I have had to manage the narrative among friends and family, an exhausting task. Most of my friends have remained loyal, understanding, or at least accepting my version that Alex's lack of trust was the real problem. His side, however, has completely isolated me. They have erased me from their lives as if I were a virus. It is a textbook tactic and, frankly, very childish, but I do not give up that easily. If he is not going to communicate with me directly, I will have to use other channels. I know his weak spot has always been his mother, Isabel. She adored me, saw me as the daughter she never had. So I decided to appeal to that connection. I wrote her a handwritten letter, sprayed with a little of my perfume, the one she always said she loved. In the letter, I did not attack Alex. On the contrary, I praised him. I wrote about how wonderful he was and how devastated I was to have lost him. I admitted to having made a mistake, without giving details of course, but I framed it as the result of pre-wedding stress and a moment of irrational panic. The key part of the letter was this: Isabel, I know your bond is incredibly strong. He listens to you. I know that deep down he still loves me, but his pride is hurt. I am not asking you to take my side, only to remind him of the love we shared, to help him see that one mistake should not erase 6 years of happiness. I would do anything to fix it. It was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation, and it worked. Isabel called me crying. She told me she would talk to him, that she would try to make him see reason. For a moment, I felt I had regained control. A few days later, I received an email, not from Alex, from his lawyer. A formal cease and desist, demanding that I stop contacting any member of his family. It accused me of harassment and emotional manipulation. The audacity. Using lawyers to solve a problem of the heart is the ultimate proof that I am not dealing with a hurt person, but with a cold and calculating corporation. If he wants to play dirty, I can too. Update 2, 5 months later. The cease and desist letter was a declaration of war. For a while, I complied, more out of shock than respect. Seeing my name on a legal document unsettled me, but the shock turned to anger. How dare he treat me like a criminal? My new strategy was more subtle, a kind of psychological guerrilla warfare. Alex and I still had many things in common, including subscriptions to streaming services, and he, in his haste to flee, had forgotten to change the passwords. I started leaving him messages through our shared accounts. On Netflix, I started watching series and movies and left them halfway through, knowing they would appear on his continue watching list. I chose significant titles: Marriage Story, Closer, Adore, Unfaithful. On Spotify, I started creating public playlists with names like For the Man Who Broke His Own Heart Out of Pride, or songs we used to listen to before distrust ruined everything. I know he saw them. The play history showed he had listened to some of the songs. There was no response, of course, but I knew I was getting to him, that I was occupying a space in his head. The final act, my most desperate and, in retrospect, pathetic move, was last month. I found out he was going to attend a tech conference at a hotel downtown. I went to the hotel bar that night, dressed to kill. I waited. Around 10, he appeared with a group of colleagues. I feigned surprise. Alex, what a coincidence. He looked at me as if he had seen a ghost. His colleagues fell silent, uncomfortable. Claudia, was all he said. I just want to talk, I said, my voice full of a false vulnerability. 5 minutes. I owe it to you. We owe it to ourselves. One of his colleagues, clearly informed of the situation, intervened. I think we should go, Alex. Alex did not even look at me again. He turned around and left with his group, leaving me alone in the middle of the bar. The humiliation was total. I realized in that moment that I had lost all my weapons. The emotional manipulation, the psychological warfare, the direct confrontation. Nothing had worked. He has built a fortress around himself, and I no longer have the key. My narrative has had to change, to adapt to this new reality. I am no longer trying to get him back. Now, my story is that of a woman who was abandoned by a paranoid and controlling man at the moment she needed him most. A man who preferred to believe a half-heard conversation eavesdropped on behind a door than 6 years of love and loyalty. He is not a victim. He is a coward who ran away at the first sign of human imperfection. And I am the one who was freed from a life of surveillance and distrust. Yes, that is a story I can live with.